Welcome to my first video in the video game devlog series. This introductory video will discuss my game development history, the tools that I use, and my first two solo games. I started in game design back in 2001, 22 years ago, creating levels for games like Unreal Tournament, Unreal Tournament 2004, Unreal Tournament 3, Tribes Vengeance, U2XMP, Red Orchestra, and other first-person shooters under the name of DG Unreal. Many of my early levels used realistic terrains that I developed with my early HMCS and HMES software, which is free and still available for download on my website. I created more than 85 maps over a few years on those game platforms, and eventually became an Unreal Engine professional. I eventually worked my way onto modding teams, and then to work for retail game companies, with multiple shipped titles completed. All of the level design work helped to increase the knowledge that I gained about the Unreal Engine. My most popular free maps are still available to download on my website. But I never really enjoyed working for mod teams or game companies, as I was always working on someone else's idea of what a video game should be. So I stopped working on video games for about a decade while I developed the base code for the TerreSculptor software. During this time, I still worked with Unreal Engine 2, 3, and 4, but as a consultant to game studios. In 2021, I decided to get back into indie game development, mostly because I enjoy the creative process of video game work. And Unreal Engine was my first choice for a platform to develop with, because I had used it so extensively before. My first solo game is Max Overeater, a side-scroller platformer collector game. I am about 50% complete on Max now, with about half of the levels near finished. Are you ever really finished though? It took a few months to get up to speed on Unreal Engine 4 and its blueprint system, which I find much easier to work with than the C++ of the old engines. The concept for Max came to me in a dream one night. I'm serious. An evil chef has stolen all of the cookbooks in the world and is making everyone eat junk food. Our hero, Max Overeater, must free all of the cookbooks that are trapped in each level. The main mechanic is that eating healthy food boosts the player's health, while eating junk food drops the player's health. The game doesn't have a lot of enemy AI, since you spend a lot of the time choosing which food to eat and which to avoid. Max is a low-poly cartoon style, is very colorful, with about half of the assets created by myself, and the rest purchased from various sources including contracted custom content. I used TerreSculptor for the terrains on the outdoor levels. The first thing that I did when I woke up from the dream was to write down as much as I could remember. Then the following morning, I wrote a complete design document for the game, outlining everything from characters to pickups to game rules. I usually write down hundreds of text notes in Notepad or WordPad for my game designs. And I will often look for reference photos of the design theme and the game items and inventory. Then the huge task of creating test levels and design tests to see if what I had envisioned was playable and looked good. Creating Max has required that I learn a lot more about game development besides the level design that I started out doing. I am learning new areas including animation, scripting, and user interface. This has been a chore since the documentation by Epic Games isn't the greatest. So I've had to read a lot, watch a lot of videos, and spend a lot of time trying things to see how they work. Max was set aside in development for a while, since the next levels that I need for the game require that I complete some features on the TerreSculptor software. I required the development of some new TerreSculptor geology devices that will allow me to modify the terrain for locations such as a small city. So for the past couple of months, I've been working on the early development of my second game, Bobot and the Mazes. The early development for Bobot was to write a comprehensive game document and to perform tests of the new UE5 Lumen system, which I want to use for better visuals. All of the levels in Bo are typically equal-size hallway mazes, so I set about to do some block out of a hallway to get the final dimensions that looked and felt just right. The levels are designed to give the feeling of being a mouse in a maze. I have multiple computers in my studio with varying hardware levels, from common Steam survey systems to a high-end Xeon workstation. I test all of my level designs on systems as low as the GTX 1060 and GTX 1650 to make sure that I get at least 30 to 40 frames per second at 1920 by 1080, and even better performance at 1280 by 720. I do my UE4 development on my Ryzen 9 5950X 16-core desktop with 128 GB of memory and an RTX 3080. And I do my UE5 development on my workstation, which is a 24-core Xeon with 512 GB of memory and an RTX 3090. UE5 with Lumen and hardware ray tracing support is a real game changer for video game visual quality. I still use Autodesk Max 2016 for my 3D modeling. I used to be on the subscription plan before they increased the rates. I probably should learn Blender, since it appears to be taking over the game industry as the main 3D modeling tool. I would never call myself a professional modeler. I get by just on low poly work and leave the detailed work to others. I use TerreSculptor, of course, for my terrain work. Being the developer of the software means that I know the software intimately. In case anyone was interested or noticed, the interface design of TerreSculptor and its viewport system is fashioned after a mix of Autodesk Max, Unreal Editor, and Photoshop. When I first started developing Max Overeater, I knew that most of the levels would be exteriors, with the protagonist starting out in the mountains and traveling into the city, and finally to the evil chef's restaurant. So I tested a 2K landscape to see if that would be enough resolution for the long view distance backdrop, while still providing good performance. I also tested some foliage on the landscape close to the player path, and ran that on my lowest test system to see how it performed. I wanted 30 FPS or higher. The goal was to create a parallax style background, but one that was using a far view distance real terrain. Rather than use a complex material or create splat maps for the landscape, I decided to simply go with an elevation gradient, single one-to-one texture. This helped to keep the visual look of the game more cartoony. Photoshop was used to tint the original grayscale height map after it was saved as 8-bit from TerreSculptor. I tinted the texture green for the grass, and any high mountain elevation was left as grayscale for white snow. The texture was also resampled from 2017, the landscape resolution, to 2048 for proper 3D texture resolution. I used a device in TerreSculptor called the Pather to create the flat player path that the side-scroller character runs along. This path was also tinted brown to look like dirt. I performed the map numerical distance measurements in Unreal Editor using the grid to determine where the path was located on the height map. This was quite the challenge. 2 low-poly foliage packs were purchased from the marketplace to use for the trees and grass and flowers, and foliage volumes were used to distribute the meshes along the side of the player running path. In the design of the side-scroller paths, I maintained the outdoor nature design concept by using logs and wood structures for the player vertical paths. The most difficult part has been finding the balance between the good and bad food pickups. Too many good food pickups and the game is too easy. Too many bad food pickups and the game becomes a hopping festival to avoid the nasty foods. In addition to the foods, there are breath mints, which are bonus points for a collect-a-thon type pickup. There are also extra player lives that can be picked up, along with an antacid to prevent heartburn that slows the player down. I decided in Max to make the game so that he can die of hunger or food poisoning, or by hitting any of the traps or enemy NPCs. When Max dies, he will respawn at the last checkpoint that he ran through. The checkpoints are simple wood signs that the player runs past. In contrast, the game design for Bowbot is quite a bit different than Max. Bow cannot die and simply loses ammo and points when he is hit. The Bowbot game is also more of a mental challenge with traps and triggers that the player has to interact with. Bowbot will also have a large number of enemy actors and main level bosses that must be defeated. One of my goals with the blueprints is to make the boss battles as high quality as possible. The level design in Bow is also completely different from Max, and as the player works their way up through the mazes, the maze size gets larger and more complex. The level design layout is also themed for each set of larger mazes, from the basement of a large factory, through the storage area, and eventually up to the sci-fi design top floor. That's all for this devlog. I will continue the discussion in the next episode. Later, eh?
Play.
Blood. End of line. Projected successfully. Terminated. Killing spree. I am the Alpha and Omega. Reprinting tomorrow, today. Reprinting tomorrow, today. Process terminated. Rampage.
10 kills remain.
Collateral damage.
5 kills remain.
Superior tactics prevail. More efficient. Denominator. Projected successfully.
One kill remains.
Master.
Flawless victory.